in here looking at the old Sweptline. I am in love with this thing, and the more and more I drive it, I love the performance of no power steering. You know, it's front accessories, just running an alternator, but God, does this thing suck to steer. The way that I've got it lowered on the newer frame, I've got just a little bit of camber to it. The way the wheels end up tilting kind of funny, the way they steer. The further you crank it in either direction, the harder it gets to turn. So going in a straight line's not bad, but parking lot stuff like that, this thing is just killer to try to park and steer. So one of my other projects that I've had, grabs the skid steer, got the front end over. This was a 72, I believe, Dodge D200 that I had. Use it for parts. Actually, most of the parts went into this truck. Well, it was one of them. But this has some good parts. So this has a power steering box. Was good when I had this truck. But as well, my Sweptline, I had a sway bar on the front of that, but it was relocated further in front of the strut rod mounts, and it actually sat lower. I scraped that off almost immediately. And then where it mounted at the back on the strut rods, it interfered with my tires, and I tore up 2 tires with that sway bar, so it didn't stay on there for very long. But this one has this style sway bar, where the bracket on my other one's up here. These ones are back here, mounts behind the strut rods, and then mounts with these brackets off of the lower control arms. So I'm going to score this off of this as well and see if I can get that retrofit onto that. And not that I need my truck to handle any better, but I'll have a sway bar on it and it'll actually handle better. So I'm going to get the sway bar off this, going to get the power steering, and then the pump is actually still on this guy as well. So don't know if I'll get all this done in one video or if I'll break this up into 2, but at least get this started. I'm going to have to go order some parts, see if I can find any of these bushings online and whatnot, but this is probably going to be 2 different projects anyways. But I think I finally broke down it's time for power steering on this thing, so let's get it done. Oh man, I almost forgot too. Most important part. It's the weekend, I'm off work. Yeah. Time for a cold one. All right, let's work on some stuff. Update on the Sweptline. Looks like I goofed and either accidentally deleted some stuff or didn't hit record, but I'm missing quite a bit of the sway bar install, so I'll just show you the final product. So, new sway bar bushings. I have done this being the 78 frame. I did van lower control arms, which are pocketed. I did that to lower it. Well, that makes it a different style of lower control arm. So the holes are actually in place on the vans as well for a sway bar, but they were too narrow. So I had to drill another hole. I used the front one and just drilled a second hole back there for the bolt. And then because of the control arm, you can see my ball joint angles are different than what they would have been from factory, which means this plane is at a different angle than what it would be on a truck. So this actually would have been normally on the passenger side and vice versa, but I ended up flipping them around. I had to grind this out a little bit to make it fit, because this does have just a slight angle to it compared to the control arm, and in doing so, flipping it over made my angles work better. And I also have this lip that sticks off, which I have just a hair of room between there. I forget what I got these sway bar end links off of. I got them at Napa. They're for a different application altogether. I think they were still Dodge, but they ended up being longer. Normally this would have been about an inch shorter for this truck, and they would have been closer. So the end of my bolt here is hanging kind of low. Tried to get it flipped around the other way, trying to get everything bolted together, and up here I was having just a nightmare with that. So I ended up going the other direction. I may need to just end up trimming that off, or not, we'll see, because I know when my suspension compresses, I do end up rubbing here. But with it up here, because the suspension moves up, this will move up with it. Ideally, or theoretically, I suppose I shouldn't actually drag that on anything unless I'm trying to make it over an obstacle. At that point, it's about the same level as the rest of this. So, I believe they'll work just fine. And then, yeah, sitting lower as they are, longer, the sway bar actually stays below this reinforcing ridge, if you will, on the lower control arm, and makes it clear. So, that, the mounts I had were off of that 72. They ended up actually not working, so these were the same ones off of the 84 that I had, but I ended up just flipping them around. They fit around the rivet on the 78, and then utilized the 2 bolts still. But these used to sit up here with the old sway bar that I had that actually mounted to the strut rod. So this is a different setup. It sits further back now, and so you can see where my strut rod mount is. The sway bar actually sits behind it, and it's tucked up really nicely. So I don't believe I'll end up hitting anything on this. If I do, it'll be just barely. So ideally it's like curbs and stuff I have issues with, so these should hit first, which you can see I've hit those a couple of times, so I may still end up hitting those, but we'll see. This one does tuck up a lot nicer than the other one. So I think this is looking pretty good. I'm happy with it. So I've got a sway bar in the front of this thing. The minimal amount of body roll that I had is almost 0 now. So I think I still want to make something work for the back. That's going to have to be a completely custom application, but this one seemed to work pretty good. So 84, 1983, 84, something like that, mounts up here, flipped around backwards. 72 sway bar and sway bar mounts, and I think this was these were a Dodge application of some sort. I don't remember, but I stocked them at the store. So got those on there, and then 72 mounts that go to the lower control arms. And just had to drill 1 new hole for that to fit. And flip them side to side, get them ground so it cleared. Yeah, that works pretty good. Alright, and new project for today. We are gonna get this bad boy put on. I should say me. Gonna finally put some power steering on my truck. So this guy got the manual steering box off of the 78. The way the shaft is, it's got a longer shaft, so I do believe without modification to the steering column, this should bolt right in. I'll have to double check some measurements. If I gotta modify the steering column, it's gonna really suck. But I'll have to get this cleaned up, get it painted, really clean up the power steering. It is nasty. But this did work on the truck that I pulled it off of a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that. So hopefully it still works. If not, I do have some new hoses. These are 2-wheel drive hoses, but I purchased 4-wheel drive hoses because they have 90s on them instead of these straights, which I believe will end up working better with where my stuff is with my battery tray with the Sweptline body on the 78 frame. So I think those 90s might end up working out better to bring it over here to the water pump where it needs to mount, and then relocate my ground cable. I do know I gotta get a shorter filter. This is a non-power steering filter, so it's longer. It'll actually interfere with my power steering belt, so you gotta just change part numbers as 1068 if I remember correctly. So I'll probably need to go get that and get this cleaned up and installed. Let's make it happen. Alright, got the manual steering box out. Pretty straightforward. The manual box only had actual 3 bolts holding in. It doesn't have a 4th bolt hole on this side. Just the center link, I guess. Pulled the cotter pin out, loosened the bolt. Pickle fork, pulled that apart. Undid the 2 bolts that hold to the steering column and pulled it out. And fortunately, it looks like bolt holes and everything are going to line exactly up, and then distances to there are exact. I measured them the same, but it's cool actually seeing them side by side here. So it looks like Dodge probably originally designed this frame, the 72 and up frame, around power steering, and then made a box work for manual steering, making it a replacement for this, where otherwise it's normally vice versa. And usually had on like the B bodies, the cars, you had manual steering columns and power steering columns. It looks like they're just the same for the trucks, and they actually changed the physical box itself. So this should literally bolt right in place. I'll have to undo the lines, still need to do some cleaning up on this, so we'll get that done. And I think this is going to be a relatively easy process, I hope. I think the hardest thing is going to be matching up some power steering lines. So those ones have seen better days. There's a lot of cracks in them, so I did get some new ones. I mentioned I got some 4-wheel drive ones. They're 90. I think they're going to work better with my application. And from everything I read, the lines are the same size. So that's going to be my only real obstacle, I believe. So let's get these things cleaned up. Okay, our steering box is painted and drying. Decided to move outside because this thing is so nasty and just coated. It's gonna make an absolute mess in the shop, even though, you know, the shop's not too clean to start with. But I figure I'll clean it out here because this is some nasty just goo on here. So I got this cleaned up. Alright, got the power steering pump cleaned up. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Is it going to look good fogged black? Sure is. And it will work for my application for what I've got. So the truck that this came out of, I don't know if it was originally power steering or not, but I know the pulley setup on the front was pretty much a setup out of like a 68 or 69 like B body is the whole pulley setup that was on it. And so I don't know if this is actually the pump out of the truck or if this is the pump out of a car. But either way, with my setup, it should work. I know with the pulley diameter here and the pulley diameter that's on the crank, I am going to have to run the shorter oil filter, which is no big deal. I just got to go get that. Yeah, get this fogged to black and get everything installed. Alright, got the pump, or I'm sorry, the box up here on the bench. Thought it'd be a good idea to test fit the hoses, just make sure they fit. Because like I said, I bought the actual 4x4 lines instead of the 2-wheel drive lines, because the 2-wheel drive ones came straight out, which I thought might interfere with my battery battery tray that I have. So I opted for the 4-wheel drive ones, which 90 off and then go over, which they mount in the same spot on the frame, and they're just a different design between 2-wheel drive and 4-wheel drive. But I just wanted to verify that these actually do screw in and fit on these, which they do, and good enough on Chryslers. You can't mess them up. They're size specific, they only go in one way, so supply is bigger than return. So they only thread in one way, and it looks like these should work good. So this guy will come off that, and it'll come up to my power steering pump, and then this will be the return of my pump, and these are a cut to fit. So they give you extra, which is nice. So that should work just fine. They thread in good. I think those are gonna work perfectly. Just been plucking away at this. Got it all mounted up. So, new steering box is in there. It's hooked up, cotter pin back through it. This was a little bit of a struggle by myself. It was kind of heavy. I wasn't sure if I was gonna have to modify my inner fender, which I didn't. It actually clears. Just barely, but it does clear. I had to kind of tuck it up in there. Exact same length, didn't have to do anything with my steering column. So that's cool. Bolted in to the same holes as the other one. But yeah, that was a little bit of a struggle doing that by myself. If you're installing one of these, I definitely recommend having a friend. So that was getting heavy. But, got that hooked up. I got that mounted, I guess. Got my power steering pump mounted as well. It looks good. And then, I got my power steering lines. And they work awesome. So the 4-wheel drive one, they are 90 down here, which is perfect. It goes back and then loops over. I ended up bending this back line, the hard line, back a little bit so that it clears my battery tray here, and it goes back by it far enough away from the exhaust. So yeah, get this thing off of these jacks, or the wheel stands, I guess, and fire it up and turn it back and forth, get the whole system bled out and keep adding fluid to it. And by golly, I think I've got power steering on the old Sweptline here. This thing's gonna be such a breeze to drive. All right, beautiful. All right, just went for a test drive. Pulled back, kind of forgot to film. But sitting here, this is beautiful. So, backing it up right now. Gonna bring it back. Steering wheel is a little off, which I thought might be the case. I was gonna be really surprised if both of those were exactly the same. It's not off by much, so I'm just gonna pull the steering wheel off and change the splines on it, make it a different way. But this is amazing. This is fantastic. So I'd say this was overdue. Really hard to back up and talk at the same time too. Not run into anything here. Yeah, right about there is the direction the steering wheel is. We're going straight right here. So I need to basically kind of make sure. Yep, right there. So I'll pull this off, just straighten it out, and that is, I believe, the end of my power steering conversion. This is slick. I couldn't be happier. This is awesome. It's so weird because the other one was gear reduced, almost, twice as much as this one. I think the old box was 6 turns or 6.5 turns lock to lock. This one's 3.5. So spilled a little bit of power steering fluid filling it up, but I believe we're doing good. Maybe a leak, but I don't think so. That might just be leftover from me spilling it. But yeah, making this thing better driver and better every day. So now hopefully with power steering I can do some bigger wheels perhaps some wider tires and I'll actually be able to turn this thing. So, and I was really surprised because I know power steering gobbles up quite a bit of horsepower. Just cruising around like I did, but I really couldn't notice a difference. I'm sure a quarter-mile time, if you actually tested it with and without, you'd see a difference, but just putting around and driving it really didn't seem to affect it a whole lot, so that's it.